Please note, as always, I am not in any position or have any training to be giving anyone advice, and that's not my intention here. I'm just speaking from the perspective of my decades-long addiction, and hopefully something that I experienced, if I can express it properly, will help somebody else. But I'm not saying X or Y will definitely work or X or Y definitely won't, because nobody can say that. And if anybody does say that to you, they're trying to sell you something. Welcome back to the Loudness McEvil Symposium. My name is Jason, and before I really get started, I need to say this plainly because tiptoeing around it helps exactly no one. I use the words alcoholic and addict here, and if you're refusing recovery because the language hurts your feelings, you're not protecting yourself. You are protecting your addiction. This whole argument about labels, don't call me an addict. I prefer substance use disorder. I don't like alcoholic. It's stigmatizing. I'm not homeless. I'm unhoused. If you drink too much and it's wrecking your life, you're an alcoholic. And if you're compulsively using something despite consequences, you're addicted to that thing. And that's not cruelty. It's just vocabulary. And balking at help because you don't like the words is like refusing cancer treatment because you don't like the word tumor. The disease does not care about your branding preferences. The label didn't cause the overdoses. The word didn't wreck your relationships. Addict didn't empty your bank account or land you in jail or hollow you out emotionally. The behavior did. Recovery programs use plain language because plain language cuts through all the bullshit. The word alcoholic makes people think that, you have to be an old dude who hasn't showered in 4 weeks in an alley with a brown paper bag in his hand. And alcohol use disorder sounds manageable. That's the only difference. I've heard people say, it's about dignity. It's about trauma-informed care. It's about reducing stigma. Those things do matter. But if your feelings are so fragile that a label keeps you from getting help, you are not willing to do what recovery requires. Recovery will hurt your feelings. It will change your self-image. It will dismantle stories you've relied on for survival. If a word knocks you flat, the work ahead is going to feel like a demolition. Getting stuck on language is often an elegant stall. It sounds intellectual, it sounds principled, but functionally, it keeps you exactly where you are. Addiction loves debate to postpone action. Recovery programs aren't calling you an addict to make you feel ashamed. They're doing it to say, you're not unique, you're not broken beyond repair, you're not alone. Labels in recovery let people find us. Refusing the language is refusing belonging. So, if your feelings are hurt by the words, recovery is going to feel brutal because recovery is about radical honesty, accountability, surrendering the illusion of control, and none of those things come with soft edges. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're stupid. Probably means you're not ready yet. And that's okay. The road ahead is going to be hard. Words are the easy part. If you can't get past them, the addiction already has. That being said, let's get going. If you want to support an addict, then you are also in recovery. Not adjacent to recovery, not supporting from the sidelines. You're not doing your best. You're in it. Addiction doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't hatch in a back alley somewhere and then wander into your family home one day asking for spare change. Addiction is born, fed, shaped, and maintained inside systems like families, relationships, workplaces, cultures. And that doesn't mean that you caused it, but it does mean that you participated in the environment where it learned how to survive. And before anyone gets defensive and shuts this off, let me say this clearly. You didn't cause the addiction. You didn't choose it, and you definitely didn't deserve it. But if you were close to the addict, you did contribute to the system that it lived in. That's how systems work. This is very subjective. Everyone's addiction grows out of totally different circumstances. What might trigger your addict might not bother me at all. And everybody has different tolerances for trauma. But, some people are more sensitive to it than others. And how badly they want sobriety is a huge factor too. If somebody isn't ready, it doesn't matter at all what you do or what you don't do. Your job isn't to prevent relapse. That would be unfair and unreasonable because it's impossible. Your job is to make relapse less likely. That's all you can do. So, make that realization a new core belief for yourself. You can't control it. All you can do is be there. So, here are some common ways that families unintentionally keep addiction alive. Avoidance is a big one. Nobody talks about the thing that everyone feels. The silence becomes louder than the problem. And I think most addicts use avoidance as a blanket or a shield or a weapon. I still have problems with confronting things head on. Avoidance for me was, it was like pretty well all of my actions, a way to protect my addiction. I didn't want to talk about anything that might lead me to having to admit that I might need to stop. So you, in my opinion, need to talk. Not judge, guilt, or shame, or play the remember when game, but talk. Openly, honestly, compassionately, and often. They're an addict. It isn't a secret. So pretending there's nothing to talk about gives addiction time to catch its breath. Addicts and families of addicts, and I guess probably just people in general, have a tendency to use normalization as a way to try to protect themselves or, the person that they love from the facts, from the truth. Well, at least they're not as bad as, whatever. But that's a load of crap. Your addict is as messed up as I was, and I was really messed up. I hope they didn't struggle for as long as I had to or have to suffer some of the consequences that I did, but if you minimize their problem, they are going to go back at it until they find out what their bottom feels like, and it's just not necessary. They have to want to not drink or to use whatever they're using anymore. So saying it wasn't so bad is almost the same as just cracking a bottle for them or bottling some crack, whatever they were doing. Something to keep in mind is that control is a mirage. You have none over someone else's addiction. So monitoring, tracking, policing, threatening is pointless. My addiction loved this because it turned my recovery attempts into rebellion. You're not their guard. You aren't the cops. You don't know very much about psychology probably, and I doubt you're an addiction therapist. So, let those people do their jobs and you do yours and just support them. And you learn how to do this by learning everything you can about addiction and whatever program your addict happens to be working. You go to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon. You don't tell them how to work their steps because you aren't their sponsor either. But you can't support a problem that you don't understand, and you are in recovery too, and recovery is for life. Don't make the mistake of thinking that you can rescue them. Covering their consequences, paying debts, fixing messes. Addiction learns it doesn't need to stop because someone else will absorb the impact. And obviously they will ask, maybe beg. I did. I lied, I manipulated. And you need to use your own judgment and decide how far you're willing to go, because not ever helping is a bad decision too. But eventually they need to feel the consequences of their choices, or why would they want to give up their coping mechanism? Emotional whiplash is hard to avoid. Going from love to rage to forgiveness to punishment to hope to despair. That kind of inconsistent emotional weather keeps everyone dysregulated, especially the addict. Unspoken contracts, in my opinion, are just another way of guilting and shaming. Saying something like, I'll forgive you, but I'm keeping the receipts. That's not forgiveness. That's you trying to control them, and that's you reminding them of what a piece of shit they already feel like. So if you forgive, then forgive fully, or don't. If you choose to forgive and support someone in recovery, that means you stop using the past as a weapon. You do not get to say, I'm fine now, and then 6 weeks later unload, after everything you put me through, or whatever. That's not honesty, that's an ambush. And recovery requires safety, and safety means that the past is addressed intentionally. It's not lobbed like a grenade during an argument, over the dishes. If you still need to process the past, that's totally valid, and it's probably necessary even. But do it in therapy or with a sponsor or with a support group. Do it with someone who isn't the person trying not to relapse today. And you are allowed to say no. This is something I don't really hear anyone say much, so, I will. You're not obligated to support an addict, unless they're a minor and you are legally responsible. You are allowed to opt out. You're allowed to say, I don't have the capacity for this, or I'm too angry. I don't forgive you. I'm too hurt. I'm not ready. That honesty is infinitely less dangerous than fake support, because what will cause damage is pretending that you're okay with it when you're not. Half-hearted support sounds like passive aggression, surveillance, conditional love, constant reminders of past failures. And you don't have to say those things. We already feel it. If you stay while secretly resenting them, you're not helping. You're adding pressure to a system that's already unstable. Whether you like it or not, recovery is a group project. The addict is changing. And if you don't, then the system will pull them back into their old shape. And this is hard. Recovery threatens the roles that everyone got used to over their lifetimes. Families have to change the way that they've always behaved. The caretaker loses their purpose. The martyr loses their leverage. The responsible one can't flex their superiority anymore. The family story has to be rewritten, and that's hard. And it's scary, but it's worth it. But it means growth isn't optional if you want this thing to work out. You don't have to become a therapist. In fact, please don't try to. You don't have to understand addiction perfectly. You probably never will. I don't. But you do have to be honest. You have to be consistent. And you have to own your own side of the street. Supporting someone in recovery is not about saving them. It's about refusing to participate anymore in the system that helped keep them sick. And sometimes that means staying, and sometimes that means leaving, and sometimes that means changing how you express love. But whatever you choose it honestly, because pretending is the one thing addiction is better at than you. And addiction affects everyone, whether it's directly or not. It affects, the laws and our taxes and our streets, and it kills people's children by the thousands every day. There isn't a reason why, as a society, we can't all make the choice to open our eyes and, be a light for someone who's lost in the dark. But like an addict in recovery, you gotta want it. Here's a quick reality check. Addicts in recovery, alcoholics in recovery, whatever, they don't decide the day that they relapse that they're going to put an end to this try. Relapse doesn't start with the drugs or the alcohol. Alcohol is a drug. I don't know how to do this properly, but drugs are alcohol. But it starts way earlier, months earlier. But it starts earlier and quietly, and usually in plain sight. Most relapses are emotional and behavioral, long before they're chemical. So in my experience, here are some of the big ones to watch for. Isolation. This was the kingpin for me. I would cancel plans, avoid calls, hide in my room. Not necessarily hide, but stay in my room. Withdraw from people who knew me and loved me and might possibly see that I was struggling and be able to help me. Because my addiction loved isolation. Because nobody could challenge the story in my head if I kept people away. Like, there was no one around to hear it. And that, again, is me protecting my addiction. If nobody can see that I'm struggling or stop me from using, then my addiction gets to grow big and strong again and take over my life. Connection is really annoying when you're slipping, when I was slipping. But that's the point, So if you see somebody that's doing those things, it's a tough one because, you can't smother them, but you need to consistently remind them that you see them and that you are there for them. Lying's obviously not a good sign no matter what for anybody ever, but Lying, especially small, really stupid ones, are a big red flag for someone in recovery. They're not usually big dramatic lies, those come later. But it's the little ones. Like, I'm fine. Fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. Or, I forgot. Or, I already told you. Or, I was just tired. When honesty becomes inconvenient, addiction starts clearing its throat. And lying isn't always about deception. It's about protecting a private inner life where accountability can't reach. Loss of interest was huge for my relapses. And this one's sneaky. Things that used to seem to really matter suddenly don't. Music feels flat. Food is just fuel. Humor disappears. Recovery doesn't make life dull. Depression and relapse thinking do. And when joy goes missing, something else usually shows up to replace it. Mood shifts and depression are often those things. Flatness, irritability, hopelessness. Everything feels heavier than it should. Depression, for me anyway, doesn't always look like sadness. In fact, it hardly ever looks like sadness in my case. And, I suffer from clinical depression it's been a long. For me, it looks like numbness, and it feels like numbness, boredom, or constant annoyance, frustrated with every little thing, irritated by everyone. Unaddressed depression is my relapse's best wingman, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people. When I would start to romanticize the past or start telling, war stories with a smile on my face, big red flag. The consequences had faded and the highlight reels of all the good things, good in quotes, got real loud. It wasn't that bad. I was having so much fun. I was more fun. Everybody liked me better. Everyone said I was more fun. I functioned. I didn't have a job or a relationship or a home, but, I was functioning. I never relapsed because I forgot the pain. I would relapse because I stopped feeling like it mattered. Another big red flag for me, for people around me, was when I would drop my recovery practices. I would stop going to meetings, postpone therapy, or just skip therapy, say I forgot therapy. I wouldn't get my meds. All of my structure just started dissolving, and it would usually be pretty quick. I never announced that I was quitting recovery. I generally had a pretty good feeling about it, but I never announced it. I just got busy, and addiction loves busy. And by that, I mean, anytime anyone asks me to do something, I just say, I'm busy. And what the hell would I be busy doing? I had nothing to do except try to stay sober. So anyway, for me, that was a big one. Resentment and scorekeeping, also a big one. Old grievances would resurface. I would say or feel that everyone else is the problem. People trying to keep me accountable would feel like an attack. And, my resentments gave my addiction a moral cover. And it turned using into self-care. I guess the final thing I can say here is that, relapse is not a failure. And you will hear, if you're in recovery, that relapse is part of recovery. It is, in that it's a strong possibility. It does not have to happen, but it is, part of most people's recovery. I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say it's fair to say that most people relapse. That doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't mean that you have to do it. It just means that if it does happen, do not beat yourself up about it. It doesn't take away any of the sober days you had before that. It takes away none of the things you learned. It's just a process. And the earlier you catch it, the easier it is to interrupt. I have relapsed many, many times, and sometimes they last 10 years, and the last couple, lasted a few weeks. And if you notice the signs that, I've just talked about a little bit, then, the move is not to panic or to punish. You just have to connect a little more deeply, maybe. Be honest, tell them what you're seeing, and offer to help. That's all you can do. Silence is the danger zone, and talking is the only antidote. Okay, now that I got that stuff out of the way, let's talk about something that seems to make people deeply uncomfortable in recovery spaces. Fun. Fun, laughing, joking, smiling, being light, being human. Somewhere along the line, we decided that if something almost killed us, that we're supposed to treat it like forever after, like a memorial service that never ends. And that's not recovery. That's probation. Recovery is not a vow of permanent seriousness. It's not a life sentence. It's not a penance. And it's absolutely not a personality. You are allowed to laugh. You're allowed to joke. You're allowed to joke about the things that you've done. You're allowed to have moments where addiction isn't the main character in the room anymore. And I think it's not just allowed, it's necessary. Misery is not a protective strategy. Staying miserable doesn't keep anybody sober. If anything, misery makes people want to use more. It doesn't make you more vigilant. It doesn't make you more loving. It doesn't make you safer. It just makes everything feel heavy. Some people think if they stay serious enough, sad enough, vigilant enough, angry enough, that they can scare their relapses away, but that's not how this works. Addiction thrives on isolation and shame and hopelessness. And what starves it? Connection, joy, presence, laughter. I didn't fight darkness I was sitting in by describing how dark it was to everybody who would listen. I tried to become a light for other people. I know that sounds really melodramatic and kind of cheesy, but whatever. That's what I'm doing. So ask yourself this honestly. What's the point of getting sober if the reward is a gray, joyless life where everyone walks on eggshells? What's the sales pitch here? Congratulations on recovery. You're alive, but don't enjoy it. No one stays sober for that. No one wants to get sober for that. People stay sober because life starts to feel worth participating in again. And if the household, the relationship, the family system becomes a place of constant heaviness, constant reviewing, ruminating, constant emotional auditing, that's not support at all. That's a slow emotional relapse. Humor isn't a denial of anything. I guess let's clear this up before someone gets offended. I don't really care if they get offended too much, but laughing doesn't mean minimizing the damage. Joking doesn't mean ignoring the past, and smiling doesn't mean that you're pretending everything's fine. Humor's not denial, it's breathing. It's a pressure valve. It's a reminder that you're still alive. And it's proof that the future isn't just an extended apology tour. Some of the healthiest recovery spaces I've ever been in were the funniest ones. Dark humor, gallows humor, absurd humor, the kind that says, yeah, that was brutal, but look, we're still here. That matters. That got me through, some incarceration. It got me through some very cold nights on some very dark streets. Choosing to live in the dark past instead of lighting a new path is almost worse than staying drunk or high. If every day is rehashing old mistakes, recounting old harms, reliving old pain, then no one's actually living. Healing involves remembering and moving forward, not pitching a tent in yesterday and calling that wisdom. Pain has a place, of course. It just shouldn't be the only place you ever go. And after addiction, I know for me, joy felt suspicious. Laughter, I know for a lot of guys that I knew in treatment facilities, laughter felt, I think, dangerous to them. Happiness felt like they were tempting fate. But joy doesn't cause relapse. Hopelessness causes relapse. And a life without light is not sustainable for anybody, for the addict or for the people who love them. Supporting someone in recovery means helping build a life that's actually livable. A life with inside jokes, shared meals, dumb laughter, music that's too loud, moments where nobody's working on anything. That's not avoidance. That's recovery at work. As far as I know, we get one life. Spending it punishing yourself or your loved one forever for surviving something terrible isn't noble. It's tragic. Be serious when it matters. You have to take recovery seriously. You have to be honest when it's hard. The harder honesty is, probably more important it is. And for the love of everything, let joy back into the room, because if sobriety doesn't lead to laughter eventually, you're not healed. You're just abstinent. And that is definitely not the same thing. So I don't know if any of that's helpful, but I would really love it if people would comment wherever they hear this, or you can contact me directly at jason@loudnessmcevil.com. I can't help if I don't know what you want to hear, or if you like it, or you think I suck. If you like this or know someone who might help, please share it with them. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. I'm doing this hoping to educate, the uninitiated and maybe inspire someone who's struggling, but it's a group effort. Thanks a lot for tuning in. My name is Jason. See you next time.